Episode 8 of the Jungle Fever podcast is here. I'm Ethan Sargent. I've got Ayden Crowley alongside me as always. And well, we finally catch the Bengals on a news day. I was gonna say we were about to record this episode a little bit ago, and we didn't really have any news. And then a big news bomb drops. Germaine Pratt, no longer a member of the Bengals organization. He has been released by the team. We're going to talk about that. We've got a few other things to talk about. Wasn't the only notable release today. Jaire Alexander has been released by the Green Bay Packers. And while it might be a little bit of a speculative move for the Bengals to make, me and Aiden are going to break down what Jaire Alexander could potentially bring to the Bengals defense should the Bengals make a big splash and bring him in. And finally, we're going to talk ceilings, right? This is a little bit of a peak off-season topic, but I still think it's a good exercise to do, especially in these doldrum dog days of the off-season where again, there are some guys who could potentially, we talk about guys not living up to potential. What if guys do hit their potential and they break through that ceiling? We're going to talk about some guys I think and Aiden think could potentially make that big jump in 2025. But let's start off with the big news that broke just about, I think, an hour ago, about noon Eastern time. Aiden's on Central Time, so he got it at about 11 a.m. on whatever nonsense he's on. But we've got some news again that Germaine Pratt is no longer a member of the Bengals organization. And the first thing that I'll say about Germaine, right? The last year and a half have been a little bit of a struggle for him, at least in terms of his on-field performance. He had a trade request back in February that has now culminated in a release from the Cincinnati Bengals. And the biggest thing with Germaine Pratt is I think he brought some Bengals fans and most Bengals fans around the world some of their favorite memories. And of course, you have to start with the interception against the Raiders in 2021 that got the Bengals their first playoff victory in this millennium, which is such a crazy thing to think about now because now they've won 4 or 5 more since that game. But talk me through Aiden that moment, right? Specifically because I mentioned it as kind of a where were you, right? As a Bengals fan, it's kind of like I think that moment when McPherson hits the field goal later that playoffs to send the Bengals to the Super Bowl, those two moments in particular are kind of as a Bengals fan like a where were you? That whole season really is probably the best season we've seen as Bengals fans. That in 2022.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you look at that and you think about where you were, right? It's kind of a frozen in time moment for a lot of Bengals fans. So, Aiden, what were you up to when Pratt makes that pick on a fourth down and goal? The Bengals could never make it easy, of course, but Jermaine Pratt was able to finish off that first victory at Paul Brown Stadium.
No, they seem to have a flair for the dramatic, right? They always win for the last
Absolutely.
second. But that's one of the things that Jermaine does so well. We talked about it at length, just you and I just talking about the Bengals. Whenever there's a big moment or something that needs to go their way, Jermaine Pratt always seems to be the guy making that play. But I have a special connection with that interception in particular because that was actually on my birthday. So the way that the NFL schedule lines up is that first playoff weekend is typically, around mid-January. My birthday is on January 15th, and that was the night of the Bengals Raiders game. So all I wanted for my birthday was to finally see this team that I had poured 20 years at that point, right? I think I'm doing the math right. 20 years of my life into finally see them come away with a playoff win. And that's what we got. And I was so ecstatic. I was in my dorm room. I was surrounded by non-Bengals fans. So my roommates in college, one was a diehard Browns fan, one was a Steelers fan, the other was kind of impartial, right? So I'm sitting there, Bengals jersey on, I'm at every play, and then Derek Carr goes down, marches down the field. You get worried.
I was,
I've seen this before.
yeah.
Then
They
right
were
back.
so going for two, by the way.
Yes,
100%.
absolutely, absolutely.
100%. They had
Yeah,
nothing to lose. Rich Bisaccia was the head coach. They
yeah,
were basically playing with house money, the Raiders,
yeah. No,
and
they
they
they were.
almost messed around and won.
Right, right. So the backs were against the wall. And once again, you need a play. You need a spark. And Jermaine Pratt was that spark. He gets that pick. I lose my mind. I'm freaking out. Even my roommates who weren't really Bengals fans or didn't want to see the Bengals succeed, they couldn't help but smile because they saw how happy it made me. So absolutely. I know Jermaine didn't play probably up to his standard this past year, but that's what I'm going to choose to remember him by. But where were you, Ethan?
I was also in Athens. I was, we were in the same year, and I was actually at a courtside bar and grill down in, well, actually, I don't know if it's called, I think it's just called Courtside Pizza. I don't think it's called Courtside Bar and Grill. But it's actually a fun fact about this bar is there is a Zach Taylor game ball at this bar. It was delivered by Jim Burrow and Robin Burrow to Courtside Pizza. Of course, the Athens connection is distinct. But I was at this bar. I was with a number of our mutual acquaintances at this bar, mine and Ayden's, and one mutual acquaintance in particular was rooting on my downfall. This is a guy who I'm going to choose not to name for the sake of anonymity through this podcast, but he likes to see other people fail, particularly because his sports teams typically fail, and he just enjoys it. So there's a great video that he got of me reacting to this play, and again, it is a great video because literally I just jump up in the air. I like, that you can't believe it type thing. And then I think about 10 seconds into the video, another mutual friend of ours who I will name because he's awesome, Jack Demler, comes over to me, and I just remember that hug is ingrained in my memory because there's like years and years of suffering that just like
Yep.
comes out in that hug. And obviously, the rest of that playoff run was insanely special, right? Going to the Super Bowl was special. But just that moment, I think a lot of Bengals fans would have been very happy if they lost to the Titans, right? Like obviously they would have been a
Sure,
little disappointed,
sure.
but I think a lot of Bengals fans would have been like, you know what?
It's
We
worth
won
it.
the playoff game, right? And I don't like that mentality, right? I always want to win it all, but I think after 30 something years to finally get the monkey off the back was special. I also there's a couple other plays that Germaine Pratt has to be highlighted by.
Yeah.
The strip on Travis Kelce in
Yep.
2022 in the regular season, unbelievable play. That's just pure heart. Travis Kelce is not a fumbler, right? The guy is tough as nails. And Jermaine Pratt just goes in, sticks his hand in there, and just pure rips it out. No, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? He didn't get the name Playoff P for no reason. He elevated his game when it mattered most. And I think what Bengals fans will remember him the best by is that he just always made key plays when it mattered,
Yeah.
right? It always felt like, especially those 2 years where they had special playoff runs, that Jermaine Pratt was going to step up and make a play. And I think that is kind of what, he was part of the heartbeat of that defense for so long. And yes, I agree with this move and that look. I think the lease is up in terms of Jermaine Pratt with the Bengals. And I do like I would not be surprised if we record this podcast and then he's a Colt by the end of the day. I would
Oh
not be
yeah. That's
surprised
that's where
if
I
he
wanted to go
goes
next is
straight to Lou Anarumo.
him and Lou.
Exactly, and goes straight to Lou and straight into a Colts defense that kind of has a void at linebacker. Again, the other interesting thing about this and Jermaine Pratt leaving is that there are only three members of the 2021 Super Bowl defense that remain,
Well,
um,
yeah,
which is
you went where I want
crazy.
to go next. So the 2020, this is a changing of the guard. I think we're just cleaning
Yep.
house, hitting the reset button because all four 2024 Bengals captains on the defensive side of the ball are no longer in Cincinnati. Shout out Charlie Clifford for having this. So obviously Pratt is cut from the team. You'd expect he's probably going to go over to the Colts with Lou Anarumo. That relationship's nice. Sam Hubbard retired. Von Bell remains unsigned by any team at this point. And then ADG, who was a Bengals defensive captain in 2024, kind of a special teams guy,
Didn't even know
is with the Cardinals.
that.
So just a major shift, I think, with this team. And I think it's a signal that, last year
Well, I
can't
think the
last
uh,
year can't
the
happen.
the
You know?
only three starters, I'll go starters only. The only three starters that remain from the defense that started the Super Bowl are
Mhm.
Trey Hendrickson, who obviously that is still up in the air, BJ Hill, and Logan Wilson.
Yep.
The secondary is completely new. And again, like there are guys that have experience, like Cam Taylor-Britt was a part of the team the next year, who was, he was a big part of that team down the stretch. There are other guys like Dax Hill had his moments on that team as well. Mike Hilton is now unsigned as well. That's another intriguing guy in terms of Mike Hilton's still a great player. I'm very surprised that he's unsigned. I think he's somebody that will find a home and succeed somewhere.
And
Whether
I
it,
think
I wouldn't mind bringing him back, honestly.
I agree because I think Mike Hilton does more for your team in the locker room. Like obviously, he's a great run support nickel guy who will come up and just thump. Like that's what he likes to do. He'll come up and hit people. But at the same time, he's extremely vocal. He's a leader. He's a guy who's done it in the AFC North for who knows how long at this point. And I feel like that's a veteran presence that you can kind of rely on with this Bengals team. I've always kind of sat there and thought that it makes a lot of sense to try and bring him back for cheap and see what happens. But with this Pratt stuff, the part that kind of irks me a little bit is when you have a guy, we talk a lot about, what he's meant for this team and this recent stretch of success that we've seen that's been unprecedented. The way that he requests a trade in February, you kind of just sit on your hands and
Fully
then
agree.
we
Yeah.
get all the way to June, and that's when you decide to cut him. Like that just rubs me the wrong way. It feels like this was the only way this situation was going to end. You're not going to
Yep.
trade a
Especially
guy.
once the draft comes and
Exactly.
goes and you
Exactly.
don't get any compensation for him,
Yeah.
which was never like if even if they were to execute some sort of trade, it would have been for maximum a fifth or sixth round
Yeah.
pick. Right. And they
Exactly.
were they were not getting multiple firsts for Germaine Pratt, right? They were not getting day two picks for Germaine Pratt.
Right.
And that's not even a knock on Pratt. That's just the situation with the
Right.
contract. You can't have a replacement level player, which is what Germaine Pratt was going to be on this defense, right? Demetrius Knight's already taken first team reps. And you can't have a replacement level player earning veteran level money. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
that. So
So
that's
yeah, from a business
exactly.
standpoint, it makes sense. It's just that
And I know I totally agree
I
with you
think
on
he
this.
deserves better on the way
I
out.
agree, 100%. I think if you were going to release him, right, I'm okay with it until the draft, right? If you try and work a trade, try and, see if somebody bites and get a draft pick, sure. But I think then you could give it a week or so. And then when teams, you evaluate after the draft and see where you are, see where you're good, see where you're not good. You do your undrafted class, right, over the couple of days after the class. And then I think probably about a month ago would have been a good point to think about releasing him if that was the plan.
Yeah.
So I agree. I don't love the process. And again, it's just kind of a theme of this offseason, really, in terms of the way that this front office has treated some of the Bengals' most important players. Obviously they got the deals done with the big receivers, which is great, and we all love that, and that's awesome for this team and for the future. But it has to like you want that effort to go for every single player. You
Mhm.
want that sort of ideology. And I'm not even just talking about Trey Hendrickson here or Jermaine Pratt, right? Because Pratt is the news today. And Hendrickson's been the news all offseason. It's the little things, even Shamar Stewart, right? Right, with this whole still ongoing contract thing. Like, what are we
Yep.
doing?
Yep.
It's just, it feels like we're grifting and we're grading over little things. And it's just, it's going to eventually cause a legitimate rift in the locker room between the front office and the players. And that causes major issues.
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely. And this is the last thing I'll say about this because I feel like we've talked about this point at nauseum. But the part that frustrates me the most is they're dragging their feet when they have nine under center. Like you have a guy who's proven to be good enough to win a Super Bowl. This is the time to go in. But I digress. Speaking of trying to go in, Jaire Alexander's cut. I think he's somebody that the Bengals should. I don't think they will, but I think they should consider it. I think they should kind of look into it, add a veteran presence into that secondary. But I'll let you kind of set the floor, Ethan. What do you think about it?
well, the big thing right now with this is obviously Jaire Alexander cut by the Packers. There were a lot of things circulating around with him over the last couple weeks and months. There were
The Bills
um,
made a move for him allegedly.
exactly. There was trade rumors, and then there was renegotiation rumors with the Packers. The Packers offered him kind of like a 1 year prove it type thing. I don't think that Jaire Alexander or his team felt like that was right or fair. I don't know. I'm not Jaire Alexander's agent. But in the end, they ended up deciding that the Packers and Jaire Alexander, I do think this was a mutual decision, that they just decided, I think, that this was the best way forward. And the big thing that I will say about this right now, and that the Bengals secondary, while if guys could play up to their potential, which we'll get to later in the show, could be very good. you have a lot of guys right now that are very much that. You're banking on potential. You have a lot of young players who are in their second, third, fourth rookie, right? It is probably the youngest, if not one of the most young secondaries in the league. It is extremely, extremely loaded with rookie contracts back on that back end, with the exception of mostly Geno Stone. I think it's almost all rookie contracts right now. So when you look at bringing in a guy like Jaire Alexander, you're just bringing vet presence, right? You're bringing a guy that not only is I don't I don't necessarily think he's at his best anymore, but there's still a good football player there to me. I'm in the business of bringing in good football players, right? I think this could help raise the floor of the Bengals secondary. And that's the big thing. You just mentioned setting the floor. I think that's a legitimate point here. You are raising the floor, right? I don't think you're sending the ceiling to Jupiter by bringing in Jaire Alexander, but you're bringing in a guy who's proven and who is good enough to hang with some of the best receivers in the league. And that would allow guys like Cam Taylor-Britt and Dax Hill and DJ Turner, who are all high draft picks that the Bengals invest a lot of capital to develop and grow, not only learn from one of the better corners in the game over the last few years, but also, sharpen their knife and, potentially, if you offer Jaire Alexander a 1-year deal, I think your goal is by the end of the season, hopefully with Jaire Alexander celebrating a Super Bowl with the rest of the Bengals, and you feel comfortable enough in your young guys to let Jaire Alexander walk. And look, if my hypothetical comes to play here, Jaire Alexander goes and gets a good contract somewhere else if he helps the Bengals win a Super Bowl. So it could be the perfect marriage of win for the player, win for the team. Now, bring that all back to earth. Do the Bengals really think that they can offer financially a package to Jaire Alexander that will satisfy him? And you have all this other nonsense going on right now in and around, especially the defensive side of the football. I don't know. I
Right.
don't. In
Yep.
full transparency, I don't think so. While it would be great and I would be a big fan of it, I just don't think it happens. And personally, I think he either goes to Buffalo or another team in the AFC North. I'm looking at Pittsburgh potentially.
Yep.
I think and Baltimore loves those kind of buy low deals as well. So I don't see the Bengals doing it, but I would love it.
Yeah, and I think this kind of proves our point and our frustrations with the Trey Hendrickson situation because you don't have that figured out. You don't really know where you stand with that. Obviously, you have a number in mind that you hope that he signs for or whatever, but that's still a question mark. So you have to kind of consider that when you're making moves in free agency and something like this drops that I think could potentially be beneficial for the team. I mean, Jaire Alexander's 28 years old. He's a two-time Pro Bowler. Or excuse me, yeah, right, two-time Pro
Mhm.
Bowler.
All
Um,
pro.
Obviously, the last 2 years, he's been kind of riddled with injury, and I think that's been the kind of disconnect with the Packers and getting a long-term deal done. I can understand from their side, but when you have a secondary with so many question marks, like you mentioned, I think bringing in a guy like this makes sense in a lot of ways, but I just don't see them doing it. It's not their MO. They don't like making big splashes. Shout out our friend Grant Kiefer, who is a big Bengals fan as well. He looked at this and in the last 15 years, here's every veteran the Bengals have signed post June 1st. Are you ready? There's three of them.
Let's
So
listen.
Mike Daniels in 2020, it's Nate Clements in 2011, and then of course the big one that everybody knows, Terrell Owens, TO in 2010. This is just something that they don't do. They don't love to do. They don't like to make big splashes. I don't expect them to. I just personally think it's one that makes a lot of sense.
I
With
agree.
defense that's young, a lot of question marks, not a lot of proven players on that side of the ball. You have a guy who you could potentially get for the low. Obviously, the injuries are a concern, but if he plays up to his standard, you're looking at a guy who can
I
transform.
would say, at the
Yeah,
very least, why not reach out and try and bring him in for a visit, right?
right.
Try and at least, I'm sure Jaire Alexander will have multiple suitors.
Yep.
Why not at least reach out and say, hey, let's take you through the facilities, let's have you meet some of the guys, and let's sit down and talk a little bit. I don't like, I would hope that they at least try a little bit here.
Yep. No,
Like
that's my thing. But I
just a little bit. I'm not saying like they don't even have to get him signed. I'm just saying offer a little bit. Like
right.
just try,
You got to
please.
pick up the phone. You got to pick up the
Yeah,
phone.
I would pick up the phone in a heartbeat. I would.
Yep.
Just right, your window is open with number 9 and number 1 and number 5. Try and figure something out to help this defense and get it to a spot where you can help those three guys on offense win your
Yeah.
football games.
And they've been making a bunch of cap moves this offseason that have freed their cap. Germaine Pratt is the newest example of this. They eat 2.3 million in dead cap. I believe they save about 5 million on the
Yep,
cap. Then you think
they
about the
do.
Geno Stone restructure. You think about the Cordell
Cordell
Volson
Volson. Yep.
restructure as well. You're gaining all this money. They still have hopefully my camera didn't just cut out, but
32 million,
yeah, you
I
still have
believe.
2 million. Sorry, I got a phone call. It like threw off my screen. So hopefully, but that's where I was getting at. They have 32 million still in cap space. Obviously, fingers crossed, some of that's going to Trey, but you still have a lot of room to work with. So I'll be interested to see what they
I
do.
I hope they at least give it a go, right? I'm not saying I doubt it happens, but
I'm in the
at
same
least
boat.
give it a go. So I just mentioned raising the floor, right? Because I do think Jaire Alexander is a floor raising signing. And I think this is a good transition into our last topic of the day, which is about raising ceilings. With the Bengals this year, right? The last 2 years, they have gone 9-8 and they have missed the playoffs by a game, right? Obviously, that's far below the standard. That's far below what this team is capable of. What if they put it together? What if the Bengals are capable of being a 13-4 football team? Well, if they do go 13-4 or better, it's
I'll go
because a
back
lot
to
of
that.
guys take big steps forward in 2025. Let's talk about a couple of guys that I think could make big jumps this season. For this exercise, we're going to skip the big three because I think Higgins, we'll see about him. I think he could potentially take a jump with, fresh payment and also, fresh impetus. I think he could take a jump. Obviously, Burrow and
Big word.
Chase, they're guys, and Hendrickson as well, if he does stick around. He's a guy, right? I'm not worried about them needing to take jumps because, spoiler alert, they don't. They're good players. The Bengals have other good players that I think are capable of going from good to great. Um, there's a couple that I have on the front of my mind. I think the first one you have to bring up is Cam Taylor-Britt because I think so much of this defense relies on the secondary and what they're looking to bring this year, and so much of it is so reliant on a couple of these guys making jumps. And Cam Taylor-Britt has shown in the past that he is capable of being a very good cornerback. Back half of 2022 into 2023, there was a top 20 corner in there for sure. Last year was a big struggle for him. Truly being a CB1, I think hurt him a little bit. He had to go up against some of the best in the league, and yeah, some of the best in the league won. And Cam Taylor-Britt, while the ball skills are fantastic and the speed is there, right now he just hasn't shown the ability to really stay stuck to a lot of guys. And I think the big thing for Cam Taylor-Britt is I think that this defense is going to change with Al Golden as the new defensive coordinator. I think you're going to have more opportunities to play on the ball in man coverage. I think that he's going to have more opportunities to stick to guys one-on-one, which I do think I think he's a little bit better in man than zone. And if he can stick on some of these guys, right? And obviously much, much easier for me to say it than for Cam Taylor-Britt to do it. But if he can improve that mobility, which I think he absolutely can, and I think he will, I think Cam Taylor-Britt absolutely the Pro Bowl can be a ceiling for him. That is, if he can snag 6 picks, which I think he's capable of doing, and if he can, not give up the big play, which is the big impetus for him this year, is to not give up the big shot because that was his biggest weakness last year. There's a fantastic player in there.
Yeah, I agree. It was confusing, I think, for me as a fan with Cam Taylor-Britt, because there was multiple times in Lou and the Zach and some of the coaches have even admitted this. There were times where he just looked lost and he had to be benched. I mean, he was
Benched
unplayable.
against the Ravens in week
Yeah.
5. Yep.
He was unplayable at times because he just wasn't where he needed to be. Coverage broke down and the big play would happen. And I always go back to that playoff run where he was locked down on an
Yep.
island with all those guys. And you obviously think that's where he can be. And you talk about the ball skills as well. You think about that pick that he had on Patrick Mahomes last year in the regular season. Unreal. The best interception just playing
Great.
um,
Yeah.
in 2024. So everything is there. It's just a matter of, getting the mental side where it needs to be, knowing where he needs to be, the confidence. Because I think that's
Yeah.
the big thing
It's
with the
big. No,
cornerback
it's
position.
huge.
You have to have kind of you're going to get beat. I mean, that's just the nature of the position. I would argue it's one of the hardest positions to play in football, and you're going to get beat a lot of times. But you have to have this unwavering confidence that you're the best guy, and this guy's not getting past you. And there were times where it came Taylor Britt. I looked a little lost and maybe didn't have that. So maybe building that back up. And then I think the other guys as well, getting healthy, supporting him a little bit more because there's 11 guys on the field at a time. So I agree with you. I think the ceiling can be high with Cam Taylor, Britt. But I think it's more mental than it is, the actual physical and ball player. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I won't go as in depth on some of these other guys, but I think that same kind of thing goes for a lot of dudes in this secondary. I'm looking at DJ Turner. I'm looking at Dax Hill, who I think the Bengals, like I mentioned last week on the podcast, the Bengals showed a lot of faith in Dax Hill by renewing that 50-year option. I think that they believe that they have themselves a really good player, and I think they do. They've just kind of struggled to find a role for him. And then, of course, Dax Hill tearing his ACL last year didn't help matters at all. But I really think that both of those guys as well could be in for big years should the Bengals be able to put it together defensively. And again, I think the biggest thing with that is Al Golden's scheme, I think, is built to help those guys not have the breakdowns, not have the mental blocks that cost them so much early in the season last year. So we'll see how that goes. Let's flip to offense, and then I'll let you get a couple players in because mine is a guy that I think he's not a skilled player. He's not a guy that is super flashy, but I think Amarius Mims is in for a huge 2025.
So
We
my
saw it last year as a rookie. He is somebody who is, again, we talked about it during the draft process last year. Obviously, the Jungle Fever podcast didn't exist, but me and Ayden were discussing this as buddies. Amarius Mims, you want to talk about high ceiling. The ceiling for this guy is all pro. He has the size, he has the physical traits, the tools, it's all there. And last year, for the most part, knock on wood, he stayed healthy. And I think if he could continue to stay healthy, which he's done a good job of doing last year, he played in, I believe, 12 games, 13 games. He missed a couple. But I think if Marius Mims can continue kind of where he left off, which was at a solid level, he played a pretty dang good rookie year, I think, for a right tackle jumping in. I think what he was starting from week 3 because of Trent Brown's meniscus tear. So I think if you can maintain that floor and start to edge up, I think you're starting to get to a level where you're starting to think about Pro Bowl. If he could just limit, I think the only thing he struggled with a little bit was the speed rushes, which is something you can
I mean,
absolutely work on in the offseason. And when you face some of the edge rushers you face in this division, you're going to lose a couple of reps. So I think, and you have a guy like Orlando Brown Jr. next to you, mentoring you from the opposite side at left tackle. I think that that's so valuable. Right. And I think that's kind of slept on is how set the Bengals are at tackle, right? They've had so many issues with those positions over the years, right? Yes, the interior is still a bit of a mess. But when you have a guy like Orlando Brown Jr. at left tackle and a guy like Marius Mims at right tackle, and specifically Mims, I think Mims can take that step next year or this coming year and really become a true quote unquote lockdown right tackle.
yeah, and you consider like what were people kind of nagging on him in the pre-draft process? It was his lack of football experience, and you think about a guy who comes in and starts his rookie year and looks solid, and playing with a broken hand, by the way, he
Yep.
fractured that right hand. He played through it, but still looked good doing it. But he's going to get healthier. He's going to get smarter. He's going to get more reps. I thought
And
that
he's
was my guy.
22,
I,
23 years old.
he's
He's very
22.
young
He's
still.
22 right now. He's
Very
22
young.
years
He's
old,
my
so he's
age.
young. He can get better. I sat there and I thought I was going to get you over on this one because I was like, I'm going to pick Mims. You went a different
My
direction.
bad.
You picked Mims. You stole my guy. But I agree with you for all the reasons you said. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm looking for big things with Demarius Mims in 2025. I think he is somebody who could shock a lot of people because I don't think a lot of people are talking about him. And I
Me
think he's
neither.
one of the better right tackles in the league if he puts it
Yep.
all together.
Yeah, so I'll let you kind of take the floor here for this for one more because I gave two.
Yeah.
I'll let you give two or one or however
Sure.
cap it to two. But go
Yeah.
ahead, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
Give me a couple guys that you're thinking have some high ceilings, could potentially hit them in 2025.
Yeah, so I'll go with a direction that I thought you were going to go in, and I think is a little bit obvious, but I think it just kind of goes without saying that Chase Brown, the way that he ended 2024 was phenomenal. As somebody, I'm going to take a little victory lap here. As somebody who drafted him in my fantasy football league because I kind of knew what the ceiling was with this team, and I knew what he could contribute. And, he's obviously just dynamite whenever he has the football in his hands. Unfortunately, the Zach Moss injury happened. It opened up the door for him to be a workhorse back, and he just crushed it. I mean, 229 carries in 2024. He nearly broke 1,000 yards rushing. He had 990. And you think about his limited snaps to begin the year. And then, of course, the 7 touchdowns. So that doesn't even go into what he does as a receiving back as well. I don't think the workload will be as much for him in 2025. I think
Yeah, because the Bengals don't have one running back
exactly,
anymore like they did
exactly,
for the
exactly.
majority of the back half of the
Ryan's going to
season.
get reps. Brooks is going to get reps. I think Moss is going to get reps. However, I think he's the guy. I think he's your
I
guy
agree.
you're going to lean on. And I think he's somebody who could be one of the better running backs in the league just based off of his versatility, what he can do with the ball in his hands. I mean, obviously, we saw him as a pass catcher. He's not really a run through your face north and south guy. He's explosive, getting out to the outside,
Explosive.
and his speed shows every single time he gets out of the running lanes and gets outside. So
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that like every time Chase Brown like takes the football from Burrow and runs through the tackles, it looks like he is shot out of a cannon.
yep,
Every single time. Like he just flies through. He's got elite speed. Like the only thing with Chase Brown is the ball security. Everything else for me is you're building a great, great running back. And I think somebody who I actually think will benefit from having less reps. I
yep,
think he's somebody that when you give him those opportunities and you don't have him in the game for 90% of the snaps, I think that I think the Bengals have sneaky built a pretty good running back room in terms of the different ways that not only can they elevate their running room, but elevate Joe Burrow. You've got a couple of really good pass blocking backs in there as well, in their rookie Taj Brooks as well as Samaj P. Ryan. I think again, I love that Chase Brown pick, and he was probably my third guy because he
yeah.
is absolutely somebody that I think could break 1,000 yards this year, could potentially have 10 plus touchdowns, and I think both of those things are good goals for him to aim for because I think they're both very attainable.
Yeah, and then really quick, because I know we don't have a ton of time, but somebody on the defensive side of the ball that I'm looking out for is Chris Jenkins Jr.
Mm,
Obviously, the
good
Bengals,
pick.
I think, showed a lot of faith. I think in their 2 draft picks last year by not investing a lot of capital in that side of the ball. They're expecting these guys to step up. I'm talking about Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, but what Chris Jenkins did at Michigan in his time was phenomenal as a run defender. And he obviously in 2024 wasn't fully 100% healthy, and I think that kind of stunted what we could see from him potentially. But I think he's a guy who can come in and be alongside BJ Hill and TJ Slayton, those 2 veterans that they got in that, and contribute. His strength is unbelievable. His play strength, he just
Crazy.
dudes
Yep.
around. And that's somebody that the Bengals have desperately needed. So I'm fingers crossed hoping for a fully healthy year from Chris Jenkins and one where I think he can contribute to a defensive line that desperately needs it. So if we're looking for
You
a place,
know,
I'm looking at Chris Jenkins.
we've spent a lot of time today talking about the secondary and talking about, right, like ceilings of potential. The defensive line also has a ton of guys that I'm going to sneak in one more because I'm going to cheat. Joseph Osai has a ton to prove this year. He's on a 1 year prove it deal from the Bengals, who still very much believe in Joseph Osai. I think, again, we've talked about this guy a lot, really, ever since he was drafted. Unfortunately, rookie year was taken away. Somebody that I think absolutely still has all the potential in the world, really played well in the back half of 2024, started to show some flashes towards the end of the season, had, I think, something like 4 or 5 sacks over the last 6 or 7 games, which is exactly what you need opposite Trey Hendrickson. You just need somebody to be supplemental. And there's going to be a lot of guys that are in there as well. Miles Murphy, looking at you. Shamar Stewart, whenever he decides to get on the field, looking at you, right? There are tons of reps there for opportunities. And it's going to be really interesting to see who starts opposite Trey Hendrickson in week one. Because honestly, it could be anybody at this point. Very open competition at that left end position. And also going to be interesting to see how Al Golden sets up that defense. How will he try to maximize that pass rushing ability? Because I think there's tons of talent on that defensive line, both in the run game and the pass game. But it's going to be about maximizing now because the Bengals struggled with that over the last couple of years. So going to be an interesting exercise to look at there. But that'll wrap things up for this edition of the Jungle Fever podcast. We'll be back next week. More off-season talk. Again, we're
Training
kind of
camp
playing it
starts
by
next
ear
week,
here.
right?
What was that?
Training camp starts next week, right? Or am I making that
Yeah,
up?
yeah. Well, today is
Today's
media
media
day,
day.
so I've already seen posts and pictures of our guys, Joe, Jamar, T. Everybody's out there taking their photos. That'll be on Twitter, so go check those out. Facebook, Instagram, you can find those wherever. But next week we'll have the pads on. We'll be playing football, and we are getting closer and closer every single week to the start of the regular season. And I, for one, cannot wait. But that'll do it. Finally, for this edition of the Jungle Fever podcast, for Ayden Crowley, I'm Ethan Sargent. Have a great day, everybody.